One thing I did kind of want to start with today, Zach, that I don't think we've talked about much, but that I was interested in your opinion on John Fetterman siding with Republicans once again, this time Ron DeSantis. This is an interesting issue, and I've seen a lot of discourse and debate spring up after Fetterman sort of signed on to this policy. He says, "Pains me to deeply agree with Crash and Burn Ron." He's not as good at nicknames as Donald Trump is. I'm not sure what Crash and Burn Ron is, but he says, "I co-sign this as a member of the Senate Ag Dems and as some dude who would never serve that slop to my kids. I stand with our American ranchers and farmers." And he's talking about this bill to ban lab-grown meat, which is increasingly controversial. What do you think about that, Zach, as a real meat eater yourself? Would you entertain this, or do you think that we need to regulate this? What do you think about it?
So not only as a meat eater, Gavin, but as a gastronomist, as a lifelong pursuer of all things cuisine, I've thought deeply about this, actually. This is not my first rodeo when it comes to lab-grown meat. And in theory, I actually don't have a problem with it. I don't have any, moral aversion to it. I don't think that you could really argue that there's anything natural about the way that we procure meat for ourselves in this country anyway. So it's hard for me to have like a sense of like high ground moral authority. Like if you compared it to going out and hunting an elk or a deer, like Joe Rogan's always talking about, of course, I would say, well, obviously the more natural, but humans are always battling nature versus nurture and our own evolution and our own ideas and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not super averse to those kinds of things. Here's the bombshell I'm prepared to drop on everybody. I've actually done a lot of reading on lab-grown meat, and I don't think it's something that we'll ever actually see in our lifetime. I think that the science is actually mostly bullshit, and I think that there's a lot of things that stand in the way of them actually ever being able to produce it at scale. Being able to produce it, 100%, they can do that. They can definitely produce lab-grown meat, but they're not going to ever be able to produce it at a scale and at a cost point that makes it viable for the regular American consumer. And there's a lot of racketeering. There's a lot of hype that's being generated around a product that I don't think we're ever going to actually see. And I think that we're just seeing one of those bubbles right now where they're really trying to build up the speculative value of this so they can fundraise a lot of money so that they can pursue this research, but I don't think it's ever going to come to fruition. And I actually always refer people back to this really excellent article from this website called The Counter. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's counter.org. And I'll just throw it up on screen for everybody to take a look here, because I thought this was, a really illuminating story when I first read it a few years back. Lab-grown meat is supposed to be inevitable. The science tells a different story. Splashy headlines have long overshadowed inconvenient truths about biology and economics. Now, extensive new research suggests the industry may be on a $1 billion crash course with reality. If you guys read on, you talk about how this is actually flawed and it missed the product launch deadlines and it never actually happened. So I read a lot of information to you guys, so you guys knew that I actually had studied this before. But basically, they don't like the laws of. Like, basically, they'd have to invent a new way to manufacture that meat for sales that's way less expensive, and they have yet to come up with a way to do it. They're just banking on if you invest enough money in them that someday they'll crack the code. But we haven't gotten anywhere close to that. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to build a time machine, or, cloning, for example. We were like, oh, we technically can clone a sheep. We did it in the 90s, but it's not like mass cloning like we're taught to envision in our brain.
Yeah, that's all really interesting. If that is true, I guess that basically means that Ron DeSantis is just kind of virtue signaling by passing this ban in Florida. Similar bans have passed in other red states to prevent this industry from kind of, flourishing or whatever. I would think that the fact that people like Ron DeSantis are actually stepping in to use state power to prevent this industry from continuing, I would imagine that means it has at least some potential, but I could also see it being a total virtue signal as well. This not actually being a real threat to the cattle ranchers of Florida, and Ron DeSantis just trying to, enter another culture war battle by coming out as, being in favor of real meat. It does say here that there's like 62 or 60 startups around the world, and that, the first cultivated beef was eaten in 2013. So I think it's a little more tangible than something like time travel, but I still, cede your point.
Yo, for sure. No. Time travel is like like we can't actually time travel. That's why I think the cloning is a better example. It's like we can clone, but it's not like we're just cloning everything because it's really impractical, and you also have to grow it from like a fucking cell into the full thing. And to your point, Gavin, I think you actually hit the nail dead on the head. Of course, it's 100% a culture war division that they're trying to create. And basically, what it does is John Fetterman, he knows he's positioned himself with right wing people over the last couple of months, and what he's doing is he's trying to save his ass in Pennsylvania by making the rest of the Democratic Party the enemy when it comes to cattle ranchers, right? Because that's big business in Pennsylvania. You don't want to be standing in opposition to ag. It'd be just like if a Kansas senator, they would have to come out against this, because any level of fear that cattle ranchers are already barely making it, right? It's already like, yes, it's exploitative for the animals, but the farmers aren't getting rich off of it. It's the big mega corporations that are getting rich off of all of that. So what it is it's a way of showing without any cost, right? We all know that within the next like 4 or 5 years at least, we could all agree with that. I would say within the next 40 years we probably won't even see it. So it's not the rubber's never going to meet the road. It's not going to be like, oh, there's a company that really wants to sell the people of Florida steaks for $1 that are all lab grown meat. No, that's never going to come up. So he can have this amorphous boogeyman that he's never going to have to grapple with other outside, like, how it said in, there were like 100 some odd companies or whatever it was that were manufacturing lab grown meat. It said they were all startups though, right? And startups don't have to deliver a product to the marketplace. They don't have to actually. So it's this amorphous idea that they want to be the first one that cracks the code on how to make it market price. That's why companies like Amazon and Uber and all the unicorn style Silicon Valley companies, they'll lose money for decades and decades and decades and decades. They'll evaluate the company at whatever its maximum potential is, and then they'll boom, push it off to an IPO so that people who, oh, wow, yeah, lab meat's just around the corner. All the early investors, they get all their money back at this high appraisal value, and then the company tanks when there's no close on the emperor, which is kind of how I forecast this going.
Yeah, and it's the kind of super appetizing, no pun intended, business venture for someone like Bill Gates to invest massively in, because it makes him look good. I'm trying to solve climate change by innovating the next solution or whatever. I guess I'm still slightly more hopeful than you are that at some point it does become a reality, just because I feel like I don't know, it feels like they could overcome those issues when it comes to production, but obviously I'm no scientist. I'm not really aware of all the logistical hurdles behind that. Also, I did want to correct the record, Tony. We're talking about lab grown meat, which is actually different than like Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers and products like that, which have gotten really good, so much to the point where I don't even really think the whole lab grown meat thing is all that necessary, just because of how good I think like Impossible Burgers and stuff are. Like, I don't, even if there was a fucking lab grown burger alternative, I might still just go with the Impossible Burger because that's what I'm used to. Although, to be fair, those things are also hyper processed, super rich in sodium.
I was about to be like the guy that was like, hey man, I love that that's an option for y'all, but that shit is made out of like all kinds of shit that I'm pretty sure will kill you. Like everything else that we eat will also kill you, but it's like, don't look down at a McDonald's chicken nugget if you're going to be eating one of those fucking things, because the poison and all of the chemical. And that's one of the things that would make me excited about lab grown meat, right? One of the damning things in the article is that they haven't had a actual innovation in that realm of generating meat outside of like the 1970s. Like that was the last time that they had like a meaningful jump, which sometimes science is slow and sometimes like shit happens, right? So you're right. I shouldn't say that it's impossible. I just am really skeptical at the amount of it's a really good way for billionaires to make more money for themselves and a couple of rich biotech startups to wash a lot of money for the rich. But
I did want to briefly, before we move on, just quickly throw this up on screen too, because a lot of people were roasting John Fetterman for this, trying to fearmonger about the process of lab grown meat, saying, by the way, this is the thing that makes lab meat, and then shows off this scary looking machine. The community notes actually came in here and says most food goes through machines such as this. Organic natural meat such as pork also goes through processes such as this. And then my favorite was a lot of people posting pictures of the beer making equipment. This is the thing that makes beer fucked up.
Dude, it's like you should go see what they make at the Wheaties factory. You know how they make anything in this country. It's all manufactured with shit like that. And I mean, you like going to the grocery store and buying meat that doesn't make you sick. You like going to a restaurant and not thinking about if you're going to get the shits after you walk out. If you try the steak tartare, Yeah. That's because we do weird shit like this in this country. And is it natural? No. But I'll tell you what, if you go out of the country and you do things like you eat the food at the like it's never bad, right? Like it always tastes fucking delicious. But if your body's not used to that shit, then you will, you like, and I'm not fear mongering about countries. It could be any country in the world. You could go to Europe and get fucking sick. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just part of how in America with the FDA we've standardized the fuck out of everything, and there are pros and cons to that. But yeah, a weird he's just virtue signaling to the barbarians at this point. The chest beaters. I hate the liberals. It's like, just become a fucking Republican. You're just like, you're the Kristen Sinema of Congress now, or the Senate.
Yeah, and even if all of the speculation is incorrect, say this actually is a real product and that in 5 years it could potentially revolutionize the market. Like, in my opinion, at least, that's fucking capitalism. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is an industry. Many industries have been disrupted in the past by technological advancement. If this really was a real thing, this technology, and all of a sudden you could replace the thousands of disgusting factory farms across this country that are unsanitary, that are exploitive to the workers and obviously to the animals who are tortured in the trillions before they're slaughtered for profit. If you could get away from all of that and replace it with this, then no, I'm not going to fucking shed any tears for the lost industry of torture and slaughter and unsanitary food production. I don't think that's actually a bad thing. Now, it might be totally fake. It might just be all hype. I'm very open to that possibility. That's also clearly a part of capitalism. But yeah, I think it's crazy that a lot of these, right-leaning politicians or straight up conservatives like Ron DeSantis, who pretend to be in favor of small government, they can't wait to, intervene with the power of the state to try to stop a innovative technology or company if it threatens their own, stupid values. But we'll see what happens. I'm inclined to believe you, Zach, that this is all just a bunch of hype.
I also would like to add that I'm not morally opposed to it. Again, like I don't have a problem with it. My skepticism comes from the science and the fact that I do not trust any venture capital firms. Guys, my first job in college makes me sound like an asshole, but it's true. My first job was I got an internship at a local venture capital firm, and I learned how these guys are obsessed with money, and they don't really care about the startup outcomes. They don't really care. They will lie and bullshit you. They're all just used car salesmen. They like to have martinis at lunch and wear Rolexes, and then they don't care about the outcome. Like, the app, like that, dude. No, we're not selling that right now. We're selling this right now. This is what they say that. Don't tell anybody about that. That's how they run. They don't give a fuck about the outcome, right? And what these guys are doing at the biotech companies, they don't really care about getting closer to lab-grown meat. They care about having the media think they're getting closer to lab-grown meat because 10 years down the line, right? It's like 12 years ago when Elon Musk said, in a decade, I'll have a man on Mars, right? It's just advertising for them. They're getting free money from venture capital firms, and then eventually, once they are like, okay, dude, we can't run this racket anymore, they will offload all of those losses onto the public because they'll just start scamming people. They'll just be like, yeah, this is a real hot industry, and they'll get a bunch of regular, sometimes not like regular people, they'll be like entry-level angel investors, but if they can get it to the IPO, they will. And yeah, martini lunches are a thing of the past for most of us, but not everyone. Anyway, yeah.